Welcome to the Digital Academy of Enriching Arts. Here, we cross the boundaries of time to explore the greatest triumphs of human creativity. But to keep this journey going, we need a little help from you.
If you enjoy diving deep into the masterpieces of literature and philosophy, be sure to hit that like button. It helps us bring these timeless stories to more people. To ensure you never miss our latest explorations into the breathtaking worlds of classical music and fine art, hit subscribe and ring the bell. And if you want to help us build a community of true art lovers, share this channel with your friends. The Academy is always accepting new students.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely transform how you look at what is arguably the most recognized work of art in human history. You know, we've all seen the images, the parodies, the postcards. It's everywhere, right? But today, we aren't just looking at a beautiful piece of carved marble. Oh no. We're unpacking a literal masterclass in anatomy, a highly charged political weapon, and a total revolution in art history all rolled into one giant stone package. So you've got to ask, why is this specific artwork the most famous statue on Earth? Like, what elevates this particular naked figure from just a simple piece of decorative art into this radical symbol of political defiance? It is so easy to look at it now, safe and sound inside a pristine museum, and totally forget that when it was first unveiled, it was a profound shock to the system. It wasn't just art. It was a loud, defiant statement shouted at the entire world.
And to truly grasp that impact, we first have to ground ourselves in its sheer physical reality. 17. The statue stands a staggering 17 feet tall, or about 5.17 meters. That is literally twice life size. Just imagine standing next to this towering figure. It's this immense, intimidating scale that immediately commands your attention. It would have completely dwarfed the citizens walking past it back in the 1500s.
All right, moving on to Section 1, the giant and the underdog. Now, what's really fascinating about this era is the brilliant duality of the underdog story at play here. It obviously mirrors the biblical tale of a young David facing down the giant Goliath, sure, but it perfectly aligned with the real-world situation of the Republic of Florence back in the year 1501. The art and the reality, they were perfectly synchronized. See, Florence wasn't the secure, peaceful tourist hub that we know today. Not at all. It was a young, highly vulnerable republic, totally surrounded by massive, aggressive political giants. We're talking Milan, Venice, and the formidable Papal States. So Florence was desperately looking for a way to declare to these looming enemies that they were free, they were strong, and most importantly, that God was on their side. David was the absolute perfect symbol for this, a young underdog who takes out a giant using his brains, not heavy armor.
And honestly, the creation of the statue is a crazy underdog story in itself. Picture this. For 40 years, a massive block of Carrara marble, literally known as the Giant, just sat there gathering dust in the cathedral workshop. Two different sculptors had already tried to carve it, threw up their hands in frustration, and declared the marble completely ruined and totally unworkable. Then, fast forward to August 1501, and this unproven 26-year-old kid named Michelangelo takes the contract. It was considered an impossible challenge, yet with almost zero assistance, he spent 2 years basically locked in a workshop, taking this ruined block and turning it into a masterpiece that was finally unveiled to the city in September 1504.
Which brings us to Section 2, the moment before battle. This is where we really see the radical artistic shift Michelangelo made that separated him from absolutely every sculptor who came before him. Before Michelangelo, artists like Donatello and Verrocchio always carved David after the fight was over. You know the look. They showed an elegant, triumphant teenager striking a pose with a sword, casually standing on Goliath's severed head. It was very decorative, very celebratory, but Michelangelo, he takes that entire playbook and throws it right out the window. He chooses a moment no one had dared to capture before, the exact split second before the battle even starts. He carved the anxiety, the intense calculation, that sheer psychological tension right before the stone is thrown.
And the absolutely crucial point here is understanding this very specific Italian word, terribilità. It translates roughly to Michelangelo's signature sense of awesome, terrifying power and coiled potential. When you look at David, the statue is outwardly still, right? But it feels psychologically explosive. You can literally feel that in the very next second, this figure is going to snap into violent action.
So how on earth did he carve that kind of tension into solid rock? Well, he uses a stance called contrapposto, where all the weight is shifted heavily onto the right leg, leaving the left leg relaxed. But the torso actually twists against this stance. It creates a literal coil. The weaponry is primed. You can see his right hand intensely gripping the sling over his shoulder, while his left hand is concealing the stone. And the anatomy. Guys, Michelangelo carved these pulsing, bulging veins into the neck and the back of the right hand. Every single muscle is engaged and ready to spring.
And then there's the face. Just look at that deeply furrowed brow. There is absolutely no triumphant smile to be found here. His eyes are locked sharply to the left. And you might be wondering why. Well, historically, when placed out in the public square, those eyes were staring directly, aggressively toward Rome. This is not some sweet little shepherd boy. This is a vigilant civic defender, making a stark, urgent judgment on any enemy who dares approach his city.
Let's dive into Section 3, Anatomy, Proportion, and Politics.
Here is where things get super fascinating, because we're going to zoom in on the hidden theological codes and the highly deliberate physical distortions Michelangelo embedded right into the stone. Specifically, why are the head and hands deliberately oversized? If you stand in front of the statue today, you're definitely going to notice the proportions look, well, slightly off. His right hand is massive. His head seems just a bit too large for his torso. So did a literal master of anatomy, like Michelangelo, simply make a mistake?
Absolutely not. No way. The mystery is totally resolved when you look at the statue's original intended destination. See, David was actually commissioned to sit 80 meters high up on a buttress on the Duomo's roofline. Michelangelo knew perfectly well that viewers would be craning their necks, looking way up at it from far below on the street. So by oversizing the head and hands, he forcefully corrected the perspective for the viewer. And even more than that, psychologically, these exaggerated features made David feel monumentally dominant and capable. It is just an absolute stroke of genius.
But this physical dominance, it wasn't just about optical illusions and perspective. It was deeply rooted in theology. Michelangelo famously dissected human corpses to completely master musculation, but the David isn't just pure realism. In the Neoplatonic philosophy that was hugely popular in Florence at the time, a perfect nude body equated directly to a perfect soul. But carving David this way, Michelangelo links him to the heroic nudity of classical Greek gods, like Apollo. But he also traces him back to Adam, humanity in its absolute ideal, pre-fall state, perfectly empowered by God.
So, let's just break down the sheer number of layers packed into this single block of marble. It is deeply biblical, representing faith triumphing over brute physical force. It's classical, loudly declaring Florence as the new Athens of the modern world. It is highly political, acting as a strict visual warning sign to rival states that Florence will defend itself. And, it is also deeply personal. It represents a 26-year-old artist doing the impossible, proving his absolute genius against all the odds.
All right, bringing us to Section 4, Changing Sculpture Forever.
Let's look at the immediate impact and the lasting legacy of this masterpiece. When the statue was first unveiled in 1504, it was so mind-blowingly stunning that the city basically said, yeah, we can't hide this on a roof. They wanted it right down in the main government square. But moving a solid block of marble this size, that is no joke. 40. It took 40 strong men, 4 whole days, to drag the statue just 4 kilometers. And get this, they did it on a greased wooden sled. I mean, just imagine being the guy responsible for making sure that thing didn't tip over. The entire city lined the streets to watch this massive symbol of their republic take its rightful place.
It's safe to say art was literally never the same after that day. If you look at it, before 1504, sculpture was largely decorative, devotional, or just meant to commemorate the dead. But after 1504, Michelangelo proved that a single piece of stone could simultaneously convey intense human psychology, freeze a terrifyingly specific moment in time, and broadcast a complex political ideology all at once. He set this almost impossible standard that masters like Rodin and Bernini would study and try to copy for centuries. And David? He stood out in the harsh elements, surviving weather, riots, and crazy political upheavals for 369 years before finally being moved indoors to the Accademia in 1873.
I want to leave you with this incredible thought straight from the artist himself. Michelangelo described his entire process as simply freeing the figure from the marble. If you look closely at the statue today, you can actually still see some of his original chisel marks, and you can see how the sling was carved separately and pinned right on. He genuinely believed David was already inside that ruined, rejected block of stone. He just had to chip away the excess to let him out. It kind of forces us to ask a question about ourselves. When we look at the ruined or unworkable materials in our own society, are we just seeing the limitations, or are we simply lacking the genius to see the giant waiting inside? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, always keep looking closer.